on the one hand, I understand young people are inheriting a world that is so broken, from climate change to housing affordability to food security. But on the flip side, I also challenge young people to go, the only way you're going to practically change the world, there's so much passion and idealism and incredible young people out there. But it's saying you just got to roll up your sleeves and just get in and have a crack. Like, I think even in my generation, there's such a fear of failing. There's such a fear of getting it wrong. There's such a fear of messing up. And I'm like, what's lost? When I started my charity, people were like, you can't run a charity that's not going to take money from the Australian government, that's going to be political, that's going to be outspoken, that's going to run this holistic one-stop shop, that's going to rely on volunteers. This is madness. This is impossible. And the more people told me what could be done, the more I was determined to show them what could be done.
Welcome back to another episode of the Protect the World podcast. Every month I connect with a different not-for-profit organisation that's making the world a better place. My goal is to learn about the issues they're tackling, interview the founder or director, and then share their stories with you. But I don't just want to share their stories. I want to contribute to their work as well. If you'd like to help me, you can sign up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes. The voice you heard at the beginning of this podcast belongs to Karapanagiotidis, founder and director of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, or ASRC. Based in Melbourne, the ASRC works to provide support for refugees and people seeking asylum in Australia. Australia has a long history of cruel and inhumane treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, which continues to this day, including indefinite detention on remote islands and the use of military force to turn back boats full of desperate people. But for more than 2 decades, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre has remained a resilient beacon of hope. Con and his team run a food bank and a health clinic. They provide housing and legal support. They run training programs and social enterprises, and they lead nationwide campaigns advocating for the rights of those fleeing war and persecution. I grew up in Melbourne, and the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre has always been a source of inspiration to me. I remember doing presentations on this topic when I was in high school, and the ASRC's work is as important now as it was then. Con is exceptionally hardworking and fiercely idealistic, and he's someone that I've admired for quite a long time. So it was a privilege to finally get the chance to speak with him, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. So now I bring you Con Karapanagiotidis, founder and director of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Con Karapanagiotidis, a very warm welcome to the Protect the World podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I always start these conversations by asking, who are you and how do you describe yourself?
I suppose first and foremost, I'm part of a broader community. I'm proudly a brother, a son, a partner. I think a human being with a good sense of ethics and a moral compass that has spent their life trying to make the world a little less crueler and a little more kinder. And I live my life in that way, just with passion, radical empathy, and welcome at the heart of everything I do. And I desire to change the world in whatever small way that I can.
Brilliant. Let me pick on radical empathy. Tell me what that is.
Well, I think we live in times where we are being deeply dehumanized and divided, and I think that is a global phenomenon where the politics of fear and misinformation and disinformation and all forms of bigotry are taking hold of our moral imagination and our hearts. And radical empathy is about recognizing that we are inextricably linked together by a common shared humanity. So no matter where you are globally, I've traveled probably 50 countries I've been lucky enough to get to. No matter which continent I've gone to, there is a universal thing that binds us. 1, that family is important to everyone. 2, that we seek purpose in life. 3, that it matters to us to be able to provide for those that we love. And 4, that we seek to love and to give love and to have a purpose in life. These are universal truths. And so if we start with an understanding that we're all actually wanting the same thing in life, and that we're all doing the best that we can, and that we all are important and matter. Radical empathy is about not losing that and not allowing our hearts to be poisoned by those who seek to prey on the worst in us, and instead listen to those who inspire the best in us. And the best in us is that we are compassionate and kind and capable, and we can do so much better than we are right now as a global community.
That was beautiful. I wholeheartedly agree. You're on the podcast because you're the founder and director of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and we're going to be talking a lot about the work that you do and that kind of thing. But before we get into that, tell me, why is there a need for an Asylum Seeker Resource Centre in Melbourne and Australia more broadly at the moment?
Yeah, so my charity is the largest independent refugee organisation in Australia. It's been around for a bit over 22 years. I started it when I was 28. It shouldn't be here. I think every year that it's here, I feel like I've failed as a leader, because it exists because Australia, like so many Western countries who apparently are the bastions of democracy and civility, approach refugees and people seeking asylum, the very people they create through dealing arms around the world. The West is the greatest exporter of these arms, and then wonder why people flee wars and civil unrest. Because here in Australia, like throughout Europe, North America, and all throughout the world, people are treated with inhumanity and cruelty. Instead of protecting refugees, we punish refugees. Instead of defending their human rights, we demonize them. Instead of enabling people a safety net to uphold their human rights, we force them into destitution, deportation, or detention. So in Australia, like many other countries, when people come seeking protection here, many are locked up in detention centres, either onshore in Australia or offshore. Many are also forced into destitution, not allowed to work, not allowed to have Medicare, not allowed to have like healthcare in Australia or an income. So they're left to perish. And so our charity, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, which takes no money from the Australian government to remain fiercely independent, provides a home of welcome and a home of hope to welcome people and to be able to provide sanctuary and compassion, and also seeks to recognize that refugees are the most incredibly resilient, resourceful, and entrepreneurial people on earth, and they don't need saving. They've already saved themselves. They just need a place where they can belong, have justice and freedom.
Fantastic. It's incredible work you're doing. Tell me, what does an average day look like at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre? What sort of programs do you have running on the ground?
So in a given day, you'll have people present at 10 a.m. when our doors open. There'll be 50 to 70 families that will come in seeking their weekly fruit and vegetables and groceries for the week, and they'll source that through our food bank. There'll be people turning up who are homeless, literally with their life possessions in their hands. Women fleeing male violence in their home in desperate need of a safe refuge. You'll have people turning up with no income to get basic medicines for the kids, something as simple as Ventolin for your asthma or insulin. And our nurses will be there to provide healthcare and access to free medicines. We'll have people turning up in need of lawyers to defend them. Some of our people are allowed to work and study. It's a completely arbitrary system. But those who are, we can help them find work, link them into courses, or employ them through our social enterprises. At the same time, we are, if I think about this week here in Melbourne, we, on the one hand, are busily helping people in offshore detention centres and advocating for them and on the phones with them, welcoming 50 newly arrived refugees from Palestine that have just arrived from Gaza. We are supporting close to 7,000 people in any given time, in any given year. So it really is a one-stop shop of healthcare, housing, food, medical assistance, legal support, employment, education. We also spend a significant amount of our time training up young refugees to be the next generation of refugee leaders. We also have a refugee resource hub in another part of Melbourne called Dandenong, where we kind of incubate and provide support for refugee-led organisations. And we also invest heavily in refugee-led organisations because we believe that in any sort of social justice movement, the people with lived experience need to be at the centre of the work that is being done.
That's you must be incredibly busy. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. It's That's an amazing amount of work you've got on.
Yeah, and one of the things that probably makes us a little unique is that we also, because we do the work on the ground, we're one of very few charities, I think, in any space, not just in the refugee space in Australia, that does the work and then also does the national systemic advocacy. So we use that independence to hold governments to account, to brief ministers, to change laws, to stop draconian and cruel laws. But it gives us a unique position because we do the work on the ground. And so all our advocacy and law reform work is informed by the reality of what refugees are going through every day when they present here. And that provides, that's very powerful. And because we don't take any money from the Australian government, we don't endorse any politicians, we don't side with anyone at all, it allows us as an organisation to have a lot of credibility in that we are truly independent. And I think that's probably what makes us so effective in what we do.
Brilliant. Tell me a little bit more about those refugee-led organisations, the entrepreneurial side of things. What have you got going on in that space?
One of the things over the last 4 or 5 years as a CEO is I really had to challenge myself and our organisation around we're not as diverse as we could be. We need more representation. We could be doing better. And so what I realized is if you're really serious about diversity and inclusion as a CEO, as a leader, you need to be really intentional about it. If you're going to challenge unconscious bias, racism, even in your own workplace that you think isn't there, confirmatory bias, you actually have to be intentional about disrupting that. That is, everyone that works for the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre are amazing, incredible people who are passionate and dedicated, but we're just a reflection of broader society. And in that broader society, there is often a lack of representation at places of leadership and power and authority, and rarely a lived experience people centered at that. So one of the intentional things I took the organization on with the full support of our board about 4 years ago was bringing in targets to get to work towards having 50% of people at every level of our organization, people with lived experience of being refugees or people of color. 3 years in, more than half our board are people with lived experience of being refugees or people of color. Almost 45% of our senior leadership team are people with lived experience or people of color. And approximately 40% of all our permanent staff are people with lived experience or people of color. So that has been a really important, significant progress for us. And we're just getting started. There's a lot more work we want to do there. We've also overhauled our whole way of working and talking about what does a trauma-informed, culturally safe and culturally responsive workplace look like for people who are refugees who present to our organization, and about how do we ensure that we are not just capturing lived experience, but lived expertise. So rather than what charities traditionally do is see the communities they serve from a point of deficit, we're seeing our people from a point of expertise and strength. The other thing we've done over the last couple of years is invest $450,000 of our own money into funding refugee-led organizations. 200,000 of that to fund organizations here in Australia, another 250,000 to fund organizations in the Asia Pacific region where often so many people are in transit. So that's 39 organizations, 450,000. And as best as I understand, it's the second largest investment globally in refugee-led leadership that has been provided in the world. It's nowhere near what needs to be done, but proud of the fact that we've actually done that. The third thing we do is every year we train up 50 young refugees with lived experience to be the next generation of leaders, the next generation of CEOs and disruptors and activists and educators. On top of that, and we do that all across Australia. On top of that, we also underwrite more than half a dozen refugee-led organizations to operate within our refugee resource hub, because we recognize often it's not a lack of capability or expertise, but often the social barriers around how do I afford that first office space, that first space to organize, that first space to assist my own community. In addition to that, we also, everything we do is led by the voices of refugees. So when we do lobbying trips, people with lived experience are part of those lobbying trips. When we're talking to politicians, all of our strategy is informed and shaped by what refugees are asking us to do. And all our campaign priorities are as well. So there's still lots more for us to do. But I'm also incredibly proud of the progress that we've made. And the lessons that I've learned is that if you're going to achieve that, you've got to be deliberate and intentional. It's similar when you think about the progress that women have made in the last 50 years around gender equity and equality. There's still massive pay gaps globally, but if you look at the progress women have made, it hasn't been made by men just giving up their power and going, let's share a seat at the table with women, it's been by women demanding that. And I'd rather our organisation get there organically rather than be dragged there one day. And that's what I like. We've done it voluntarily, intentionally, deliberately. And it is now something that is so deeply in the DNA of the organisation. There's still work to be done, but it's something everyone is proud of at the ASRC and everyone buys into. And again, that's a team effort, but the importance is, again, if you're going to create equity and inclusion, you've got to be deliberate about it, and you've got to build the systems, the investment, the leadership, and you've got to just keep repeating until you get there. And so we've still got work to do, but we're well on our way.
Brilliant. It sounds like as an organisation, you're really living your values. And I guess that's something I want to get to the heart of with this next question. When I was preparing for this interview, I got the impression that the experiences of you, your parents and your grandparents were quite sort of foundational to the ASRC. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind walking us through your family's history and how those experiences helped to shape the values behind your organisation.
Look, I think anyone that's drawn to work around freedom and justice and social justice, so much of that is informed by people's own lived experiences and journey. And so for me, I came from a poor working class Greek immigrant family. Parents came to from Greece to Australia in the 60s with nothing, but the hope for a better life, not wanting to leave their country, but being forced to by their parents because they grew up in poverty. I was the first to go to high school in my family. My dad had to work the fields of his family from the age of 9, my mother from the age of 12. So you understand what it's like to come from poverty, adversity, and you also understand how much you have, you've just simply won the lottery of time and place. And I always try to teach people this when people think they are better than refugees or better than newly arrived migrants. And it's just a lottery. Or I think about my grandparents on my father's side, who I only met a couple of times in my life when I went to Greece when I was a child. Unfortunately, didn't get to spend my childhood with them. They had themselves been Bondian refugees from the Bondian genocide. And so you think 100 years ago, if I was born then, I would have been the refugees that my grandparents were. If I was born back in the 1940s, I would have been my father when he was alive, telling me about having the Nazis occupying his little village in Greece. Like, it is just a lottery. And I think those experiences of that, and then growing up in Australia, in a little country rural town where you're one of only a couple of migrant families and people telling you you're a wog and telling you to go back to where you came from, that you learn at a young age what it's like to not belong, what it's like to be othered, what it's like to not feel welcomed. And I think, so when you grow up not with privilege and you grow up seeing the sacrifices of your family and you grow up experiencing racism, those things can either break you or make you. And I think for me, fortunately, they made me rather than they broke me. It didn't cause a significant amount of harm to my sense of worth and self-esteem and mental health, which it did, but it also built an incredible resilience and resourcefulness in me as well.
Incredible. I'm interested a little bit about the early days of the organisation. I didn't realise that the ASRC was founded just 2 months before the Tampa affair, so you were definitely thrown right into the deep end right at the start. How did it all start, and what were those first couple of months like?
Yeah, so the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre began as a school project. It was established while I was teaching in TAFE. And for those that aren't from Australia, it's the equivalent of like a community college, a training school. And my students, who were a mixture of mature age students, newly arrived migrants and refugees, single parents, people, lots of mums who were just going back to study after raising their families. I think a lot of, there wasn't high expectations for what they could do. And I wanted to teach them that they could change the world and make a difference. And so I love to teach from the perspective that at any time you can make things better, and that idealism is a powerful thing and compassion is a powerful thing, and that the toolkit for change you already have in your heart. It's not a qualification that will give you that will help you. And my students just had to do a practical class project. They had to spend 8 weeks in the community, a day a week, volunteering for a charity. And no one would take them on for such a short period of time. And I said to my students, I've been volunteering for the last year or so, seeing refugees or survivors of torture as a favour to a Catholic nun from the Red Cross who asked me if I could help. My background is I'm a social worker, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher. And they'd asked me in my capacity as a social worker if I could provide some counselling to these young men who were survivors of torture. And what I discovered was that people seeking asylum in Australia were struggling to even be able to access something as simple as a food bank. And so I said to my students, if no one will take you, because they're going, well, no one will take us, what do we do now? And I said, well, what do you think about starting our own charity? And I had a lovely friend named Pablo and Diana who were running a little non-for-profit organic grocery store and wanting to donate the profits of that to help social causes. And they had a little tiny shop front, 5 metres by 4 metres here in Footscray, a working class suburb of Melbourne in Australia. And they said, look, you can have that little shop front if you want. So I said to my students, look, I've got a little shop front. What do you think about starting our own charity? And they thought I was joking, like, what do you mean we're actually going to start a charity? And I said, well, at any time you can change the world. There are people going hungry in need of food. We've got 8 weeks together. We've got every Friday together. What do you think about starting this? And once they realised I wasn't joking, we talked through what should we call our charity. And it was like, well, food is what we're going to be providing, which is a resource, and it's asylum seekers we're going to be helping. So the name Asylum Seeker Resource came up on that day. And then I broke them up into little groups. One group went and built shelves and painted this little shop front. Another group went out and organised a street party. Others went out and begged for donations of food. Others organised figuring out, how we would organise this little charity. The place was furnished with furniture from my mum. And 8 weeks from that conversation, on the 8th of June 2001, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre began operating 2 days a week while I was teaching 4 days a week at the university I was at. The university eventually sacked me for starting the organisation through a class project, thinking that it's different now. That university has come a long ways. It's now one of the great champions of refugees. But back then, it was it's still an incredibly politically controversial issue. But back then, it was an issue people didn't want to touch at all. And so it was a very different times. And so we start this little charity, and initially, a few people are coming in to donate food. A few people are coming in to give money. Most of the students move on. A handful stick around and run the charity with me. And then the Tampa happens, which is where 434 refugees on a boat were rescued by a Norwegian ship. And the Norwegian ship was trying to dock in Australia. And the Prime Minister at the time, John Howard, who really started this descent to racism and fear-mongering in Australia, said, we will decide to come to this country in the manner in which they came, and wouldn't let these people dock. And so suddenly we went from just a couple of people coming in wanting to help or donating money to, this is a couple of months later, this is just August of that same year in 2001, people just coming in going, I can't keep screaming at the television. I'm so ashamed of what's happening. How can I help? Here's $50. Here's a box of veggies I've just grown. Here's some scarves I've just knitted. What else can I do to help? And so we went from volunteer nights where I would have 3 people that I'd be sitting for 3 hours talking to at its peak, we'd had volunteer nights where 1,400 people would come to like the big Melbourne Town Hall in our city just to come and find out about how to volunteer. And I think the worse things became, and the worse things have become over the last 2 decades, the more it's also inspired the best in Australians to actually be compassionate. So while Australia is a racist country like most countries are, there's also another part of Australia that's an incredibly welcoming and compassionate. And we're one of the greatest multicultural and Indigenous success stories in the world. We're an incredible nation. And I think as things have gotten worse and worse and worse, it's also brought out the best in people. And so over the last 22 years plus, I've had hundreds of thousands of people offer their support to our charity in lots of different ways. And I think that's the part of the hope part about when things are really dark and difficult, you've got to use those opportunities as a chance to inspire people to do good and show people that we can be better than this.
Fantastic. It shows that as well that you threw your hat in the ring, and it's amazing what can grow from those early seeds, from going from 3 people to 1,400. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I keep trying to say to young people, I think we're in a time where there's on the one hand, I understand young people are inheriting a world that is so broken, from climate change to housing affordability to food security. But on the flip side, I also challenge young people to go, the only way you're going to practically change the world, there's so much passion and idealism and incredible young people out there, but it's saying you just got to roll up your sleeves and just get in there and have a crack. I think even in my generation, there's such a fear of failing there's such a fear of getting it wrong. There's such a fear of messing up. And I'm like, what's lost? When I started my charity, people were like, you can't run a charity that's not going to take money from the Australian government, that's going to be political, that's going to be outspoken, that's going to run this holistic one-stop shop, that's going to rely on volunteers. This is madness. This is impossible. And the more people told me what could be done, the more I was determined to show them what could be done. But I also think it is an incredible thing around our fear of failure, rather than going, well, you've already failed by not trying. You've already rejected yourself and failed yourself before anyone else could. And over the years, there's lots of hard lessons you learn. Lots of times you fall flat on your face, but at least you're out there having a go. And I think that's what nothing beats that good old-fashioned work ethic of just working hard, doing something you're passionate about and that you love, and giving the best of yourself. And if you do, you might be lucky enough to inspire others to join you, because you can't do this on your own. It's a community effort, and you can do some good for people. So I always just encourage people, start anywhere, do something, but also do it beyond the online world. I think we've confused. The online world is important. I'm on every social media platform known to humanity, and that has its place, but nothing beats being at the grassroots in a community. And I think we've confused that this can all be done virtually, or this all can be done through TikToks and posts and likes and retweets. That's got a place. As I said, I'm passionate about that stuff. I'm on that stuff. There's an incredible community. It's connecting me to people I would never have met, who do such amazing things through their online amplifying and advocacy. But people have to also get out into their real communities. That's where the really hard work needs to be done. You can't just do it virtually through social media platforms.
Yeah, definitely. You've been at the helm for 22 years now. I'm interested, what other pivotal moments have there been for you along the way? What are the one or two standout moments in that period?
Oh my God! I mean, there's been so many. I think some of the ones that stand out is being able to be part of defeating this sitting Australian government in passing a law that had never been done. Like the government in power had never lost a vote while in power for 70 years, and the law we were able to pass with the help of others was one that allowed us to medically evacuate hundreds of critically ill refugees who were held in offshore detention camps, who could have otherwise died. I think about paying a people smuggler to get into Manus Island with my team to video and document the human rights abuses that were happening there. I think about the more than 30,000 people have come through our doors since we began. And I suppose every one of those moments and memories in the early years, when I was on the ground doing the legal work myself, I could remember without exaggeration, thousands of people's names. And every one of those people have this incredible story of hope and possibility. Some of my favorite memories are helping free children from detention, helping evacuate thousands of people from offshore detention camps, our organization playing a part in getting hundreds and hundreds of children who were slowly dying in detention centers out to safety. Memories that stick to my mind are when I bump into a young person at a graduation ceremony where they're graduating, who first presented to our charity years earlier in crisis with their family, or visiting a local cafe, by someone who originally came seeking asylum and is now a successful small business owner. Or there's so much joy out there. There's so much hope out there, and I have thousands of wonderful memories, and also thousands of really traumatizing and terrible memories. And I don't want to forget those either, about what's been done, the refugees killed by the negligence of our governments, the thousands of people who've had their lives torn apart and separated from families, and the children whose childhoods were stolen simply for the politics of fear and just to get votes. And there's a lot. I have a lot of memories over the last 2 decades, and I don't want to forget any of them, the good and all the bad.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All of it was, it must be an incredibly, what's the word? The highs and lows of it must be, the extremes would be pretty tough, I imagine.
Yeah, but I think that's also part. I always say to people, if you want to work in social justice spaces, you've got to be prepared for both. This work is not for everyone. It tears on the heart and on the soul, and it comes at a personal cost. On the one hand, it's the most incredible work you'll ever get to do, and it's an honor and a gift. But it's also okay if it's not right for you, because the personal toll is enormous, and to watch person after person, family after family, needlessly suffering, and to return to your own life where you have freedom and safety and security, and the extremes between the people you serve and the life that you have is so wide, and that's the gap you're trying to close in your work. But again, for some people, it's too much.
That sort of links to one of my questions I was going to ask a bit later, but I'll jump ahead to it because I think it's relevant. I guess I see you pop up on social media and that kind of thing every now and then, and even in this conversation, you've got this kind of infectious positivity and warmth about you. But yeah, as you just said, the work is often quite tough and confronting. Are there times where it's difficult to hold on to that idealism and optimism? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Oh, of course. Like it has, doing this work has jeopardized my health. I've had, God knows, endless health scares, struggling with, looking after myself, eating well, weight yo-yoing up and down. It's put enormous pressure on my incredible supportive family. It's cost me relationships in the past. It's caused me at times to feel depressed and really struggling to cope. Like this work is really heavy on the heart, and as I said, it really comes at a cost. And there's many a day where you actually don't want to face into it because it hurts so much to do this work. And what keeps me going is perspective and gratitude and my values. So perspective as in, this is really hard, I'm struggling, but this is nothing compared to the community that I'm serving. Not to diminish what I'm feeling, but just to ground it and go, I'm not the victim. I'm choosing this. So one, I'm not a victim here. Two, I'm not doing anything special. I'm just doing what I love, and I get to do what I love. Unlike my parents who spent their lives doing jobs they hated because they needed to put food on the table for their families. Gratitude, I get to actually do what I've chosen to do. And I think it's really important if you take on this work, it's important to remember you're not the client. You're not the person in need here. You're choosing to be part of this. And my values, which is I want to live a life of purpose and intention. And I want to live my values of integrity and passion and justice. And so, and then obviously having a support network, I always say to people, if you're going to do this work, make sure you surround yourself with people that get you, whether it's your partner, whether it's your friends. Make sure you build a community of support, because so many people all throughout my life, you'll never amount to anything. You'll never achieve anything. You can't do this. You got to get rid of the fire in the belly. This is not realistic. Life is hard enough without having people tearing you down or telling you what you can't do or making you feel bad and guilty for caring so much or making you feel stupid for being so invested in what you do. You need to be around people that get you. Whether it's in your professional or your personal life, you need to have people that actually are aligned with your values, because life is hard enough without being surrounded by people that actually don't care and aren't invested, because at the end of the day, it's actually not about you. It's about the people you serve. And if you lose sight of the people you serve, and that's where I always catch myself is, I like the fact that even after 22 and a half years, I'm the same person. I have the same values when it comes to my work. I'm just as outraged at what's happening. I'm just as fired up. I'm just as hardworking. Because the minute I'm not, I need to walk away from this job, because then I'm not doing a service to the people that I'm there to represent. And our organisation really does care about the psychological safety and well-being of our people, the physical safety and well-being of our people. So we put a lot of time and energy into making sure the work we do is sustainable. And I think that's really important. It is not a good thing to burn out. It is not a good thing to get sick at work. It is not a good thing to find the work unsustainable, to overwork and not have time. Actually, balance in life is super important. Work-life balance is super important. Make a point of making sure people do their hours and then go home, because time with family and friends and self is just as important. And in fact, it's more important. So, but as a CEO and as a leader, when you're a founder, you're signing up to something a bit more different. That one, you can't fairly expect it of anyone else. And two, it's part of the package deal. And what I mean by that is, I'm not romanticizing it. I'm just saying that if you are a founder of something, The reality is you can't build something great without going beyond what is reasonable for yourself. That's just the truth. So I would have spent the first 15 years of the organization working a minimum of 80 hours a week. How do you build something like this without doing so? The truth is you can't. And I think that's the hard thing people don't maybe want to hear anymore. You can't. You can't. Like, you build something from scratch and then build it to where, we're a $20 million plus organization with hundreds of staff and almost 1,000 volunteers. You can't build that through you just can't. But that's a choice you opt into if you want to found something. It's not something I recommend, as in, I don't want anyone working those sort of hours or doing that. But I'm also just trying to be honest about, this idea that there's not a shortcut to this. And if you're going to build something that is an outlier, that's not, you don't have the comfort of government funding, you don't have the comfort of security, it's going to take just constantly grinding away to keep the doors open. And that doesn't stop. Even to this day, I wouldn't work less than 60 hours a week. You just can't. When you're the founder and CEO, I don't want that, and nor do I have that for our staff. And nor am I romanticizing this. I'm just being honest around. If you're going to create something and found something, you just got to be prepared for the thankless extra hours you just have to do as part of building something. Just like anyone who starts a small business, they talk to anyone who starts their own small business, their cafe, their restaurant, their startup. Everyone will tell you the same story if they're being honest.
It's an incredible work ethic you've got. I'm interested to dig into sort of where that came from. Who were your key influences and role models when you were growing up?
My mum and dad. My dad would be up at 4 a.m, and then he would be home at 10 o'clock at night, and he would get up hours earlier so my mum could sleep till 7 before she would come and join. And then my mum has the strength and resilience of 10 men put together. My dad the same. They would the work ethic of my father, just to work so hard. And I think part of my perspective is, I work hard, but this isn't hard work. And what I mean by that is, this is nothing. Like, part of the perspective piece is, I get to come to an office and do work I love with purpose and meaning, and people praise you for it, even though you're just doing your job. My parents spent their lives, the best years of their lives, in farms and factories where they were exploited, where they worked till their bodies couldn't work anymore. And no doubt, I lost my dad when he was 63 and I was 27. No doubt that factory job killed my dad. It was full of asbestos and whatnot. So this isn't real hard work in comparison. And again, that might not be something people want to hear, but I'm just speaking for myself. And that is, I do not think this is hard work compared to what my parents did. That is, my parents were exploited every day in dangerous physical backbreaking conditions where they worked till their bodies couldn't take it anymore. And that's, it's an unreasonable threshold to set for yourself, but but in all honesty, that is what I compare myself to. And I go, this isn't hard work compared to what they went through, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Was there a particular moment that you knew working with asylum seekers and refugees in particular was something you wanted to dedicate and work that hard on?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always encourage young people to do is to go out and volunteer. So, there's lots of people at my age that still don't know what they want to do. And so the first thing is about, it's okay to not know what you want to do. You don't have to have it all figured out. I encourage young people to be curious, be passionate, experiment, try everything and anything. Young people are incredible, and you're like going, and I love the fact that they're so curious and passionate, engaged. And but you can also see them almost and we live in a time where information is so at your fingertips. I reckon it can almost be overwhelming around, where do I begin and what do I do? There's so many causes. And I say to people, just go out and volunteer. Between the ages of 18 and 28, I would have volunteered in about 24 different charities, and I went and tried everything I was passionate about. I would go and volunteer at the Children's Hospital in Melbourne on my Sunday mornings, playing with terminally ill kids. On my Saturday nights, I used to volunteer for an organisation that used to exist called the Prostitutes Collective of Victoria, where I would go out and outreach and support sex workers on the street to be safe, and provide condoms and warn them about predatory men that had been out there targeting sex workers. I would spend my Monday nights. I befriended a group of men who were survivors of child abuse, and I'd spend my Monday nights at 20 running support groups for male survivors of incest. I would spend my Wednesday nights doing a midnight shift on a crisis phone line, providing telephone counselling to people who were calling, talking about wanting to take their lives because they had no one to talk to. They were speaking to me as a stranger at 3 a.m. I would spend my Fridays advocating for people involuntarily hospitalised in psychiatric hospitals as a paralegal and representing people before mental health review boards. All of these experiences, of many of them, were the greatest teachers and lessons. I'm passionate about education because my parents didn't have any, so I was fortunate enough and lucky enough and privileged enough because of their sacrifices, and I'm so privileged to be able to go and get 6 university degrees, which I have, and because education is power. But the best lesson I had was actually going out there and doing volunteer work. And in doing all that work, of all the things I did, and I've loved many things I'm passionate about, I still volunteer on a board supporting First Nations, Indigenous communities in Australia. I'm deeply passionate about women's rights. But of all the things that resonated most deeply with me was my volunteer work helping refugees. And probably what resonated the most was it was absolute life and death. And maybe that was what made it feel like this is where my time is best spent. Of all the things I've tried, this is the closest I've come to the stakes of life and death. That is, if these people, it's not these people have already saved themselves as a resilient resource, but if these people cannot get access to essential help, they're going to be sent back to countries where they could be executed, tortured, or imprisoned for life. And I was so drawn to the significance of that and the courage and resilience of people. It just felt like the right thing. And I always say that to people. You'll know what the right thing is by just going out and trying until you find something that's like, this is my community, this is where I belong. And we're all looking for that, as trying to find a sense of belonging.
That's an incredible journey. Wow. That was very, very inspiring. Getting towards the end of my questions now, I want to ask you about your toughest, most challenging day or experience working for the ASRC. And I also want to ask you about your best, most rewarding day or experience. And I'll let you decide which one you want to talk about first.
The toughest day, I could literally list hundreds of them. I think, I do think perhaps, one that really does stand out to me is when I went to Manus Island, and so the offshore detention centre in Papua New Guinea, in the middle of nowhere, and we pay a smuggler, we get on a boat, and we get there. And at the time, the Australian government was trying to starve these men out. They were trying to move them to another detention centre. And so they had actually left the island. They had cut off the water, the food, the electricity for these men. And I remember arriving on this island. These men had been held there at the time for, I think there was 5 years at that time. And there's still 57 men detained there now 5 years later. And there were these men who had everything stripped from them, their freedom, and the government was starving them to death. And then these men just greet you with the biggest hugs and welcome. And the first thing they do is they offer you a cup of tea and whatever food they have, they're offering it to you. These are men being starved to death, and they're offering you their food. Sit down. And then they're walking around the camp with you, and they're showing you where different men had taken their lives and where different men had been killed, and about the areas that don't go anymore. And I remember meeting a man there who was so unwell. He was suffering from serious mental health issues and also from diabetes and just a whole range of, and all these things were untreated. They'd run out of medicine. This man was receiving none of the medicine that he would require. And I remember thinking, God, this man is so unwell and so at risk. And we're trying to get this man off that island. Fast forward a few months later, and this man takes his life. And we call his wife to give our condolences because she's in another country hiding, hoping to be able to be reunited with him. Just calling to give our condolences, and we find out that the Australian government, even though they had died days earlier, hadn't actually called her to tell her that her husband had died in their care, and in fact they were hearing the news from us. That was quite something. One of my most joyful moments, I think, was I had a lovely moment a few years ago. I was receiving an honorary doctorate from a university, and I was there with my mum in my gown, and this young woman comes up to me, all dressed up in her beautiful graduation gown, and she goes, "Do you remember me?" She goes, "Oh, can I see your mum? I want to hug your mum. I want to give your mum a big hug." And she introduces me to her sister and her parents. She goes, "And when we were like 5, 6 years of age, over 15 years ago, we came to your charity with nothing, and you got our family asylum and helped us. And today I'm graduating. I'm the first to graduate from my family at university." Those sort of stories are beautiful. Yeah, those sort of stories are, you know. Are just what keeps you going as well. You need those sort of stories. You need those good news, and but sometimes the really powerful stuff. I'm blessed to work with so many incredible staff and volunteers at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and everything is a community effort. And so sometimes the most precious thing is just when someone comes in for the first time and we just say welcome, or they're able to sit down and share a hot meal together, or be able to provide food for their families. Not everything is something like winning someone freedom, like especially when you're dealing with a government that does everything it can just deny people that. So I also try to have gratitude in the small details around the ability to come to work and work with people who care about changing the world, and the small acts of people just feeling seen and welcomed and cared for. I think that in itself is a daily reward. So for all the hard and painful parts of doing this work, I wouldn't choose a different path. If you asked me, 28-year-old me when I'm starting this, do you want to do something different from this? No, the things I would learn, maybe not, maybe not work as hard, take better care of myself, not be so hard on myself, and recognize that you're only human, and you can't do everything or please everyone or achieve everything that you might hope for. You're doing your best, and you're learning and making mistakes all the time, which is what makes you human. And I think that's the other thing. I wonder whether young people face an even greater challenge these days around the pressure to be human and to not be perfect and to have everything figured out. I worry we're far more unforgiving around failure and people growing and learning. Like me now in my 50s is not me in my 20s, nor should it be. You'd like to think I've grown and learned and become a better person and a better leader. But I think we almost try to judge people at their hardest moments or their worst moments as though people don't learn and grow from them. You actually don't grow from your happy moments. You grow from pain. You grow from loss. You grow from grief. You grow from adversity. And the most important thing I always say to people is run towards fear. And I think that's the thing I wish I learned at a younger age, which is the more afraid you are, the more you're heading in the right direction. Because fear is that holy grail of what you wish to have or experience, or what you think you're not good enough for and you're not deserving enough for. And I think I've always worked hard and grappled with that, about not having a strong sense of self-esteem and self-worth, and always struggling with the idea that I'm enough, and that that I'm enough regardless of what I do in my life or who I help or what I give. And I think so many leaders, always struggle with that. They struggle with a public perception of themselves, where people just think you've got it all sorted out and you're all confident and sure. And the personal part of you, which is vulnerable and messy and complex and uncertain, just like every other person is. So I think one of the things I would say to leaders is be vulnerable and be authentic and let people in, because you can't do it on your own. And also, people are only, if all they see is this confident outside part and don't see the other human part of you, well, how are they going to be there to support you if you don't let them in to also offer you help? And so that's been an important thing I've had to learn as well. Good leaders ask for help. Good leaders trust the people around them. Good leaders give the people around them, empower them to be able to be part of making a change. You're only as good as the people that follow you and work with you. You can't achieve any of this by yourself.
Brilliant. My next question that I ask everyone is usually, you wake up tomorrow and find you've been elected Prime Minister, what do you do? But I'd sort of like to take that a little bit more seriously with you. I'm really interested, having had you been at the forefront of this for 2 decades, what Australia's asylum seeker policies would look like if you were in charge of them.
So I think what Australia's asylum seeker policy would look like if we're in charge of it. So Australia is just committed to taking 20,000 people in total each year, where it doesn't even put us in the top 60 based on the wealth. So if I was Prime Minister tomorrow, I'd start with some really basic things. One, we're going to start taking 50,000 people immediately as a starting point. Two, we're going to invest billions in our region to actually support the Asia Pacific region that actually takes on so much more of the responsibility, and support them to also be places where people can seek protection and asylum with dignity, safety, security, as well as working and being a shining example to encourage our entire region to sign up to the Refugee Convention. Three, we would start implementing sanctions and stop trading with the very countries that we are creating refugees from. We are so responsible for so many of the refugees, whether it's our wars in Afghanistan, our trade with Sri Lanka, all the things that we've done here, over the last couple of decades, and then wonder what is happening here. So I think we need to go, we are not going to be assisting in any arms trades. We're not going to be assisting creating a next generation of refugees, and we're going to use sanctions for countries that are refugee producing rather than be trading with them. Four, we're going to not allow this to be politicized. We're going to work for bipartisanship. This is a moral and humanitarian issue. It's not a political one. Five, we would commit to there being no mandatory indefinite detention of people. Six, we would let all people who come and seek asylum the right to work, healthcare, and a safety net while they get on their feet. Seven, we would, positively and continuously talk about the contribution that multiculturalism and migrants and refugees have. And eight, in every policy and practice and law, in every big picture vision of this country, instead of what's happening now where we're cutting immigration, we're apologising for immigration, we're scapegoating immigration for cost of living pressures, we would actually go embrace the fact that post-World War II, immigration has transformed this country, and that we would actually be investing in that. And we would also be looking at ways of going, how do we meet our humanitarian obligations and also be entrepreneurial and go, we can actually strengthen our economy and our community and our country while actually taking many more people too. You'd start with those basic things, and that's the... we sit there and we blame refugees, and yet the system that is failing us is the current system. And I'd scrap all these awful things. I'd end offshore detention. You would stop leaving people in limbo 12 years later still waiting for a visa. You would have a fair legal process and people are able to access legal assistance. Like, at the heart of it, it's about you would lead a government that understands that refugees are the victims, not the villains here. And our job is to protect them, not to punish them for not dying. Yeah? And that you don't want anyone getting on a boat and coming by sea. And so you tackle that by providing safe passage, by actually creating an actual queue that enables people to safely be resettled here and throughout our region. Neither of those things exist right now. And then we blame refugees for being forced to take unsafe journeys, just like we do in North America and in Europe and throughout the world.
You've got me fired up. You got any plans to go into politics, Con? Ever something you considered?
Look, I've been approached a few times to run for the Senate in the federal government. I've said no so far. I don't know. Look, when I go to Parliament House, just the pressure around compromise is so deep. I don't know. I don't know if that's... I'm not sure. Like, I don't know... Am I more effective outside of that system, or am I more effective inside of that system? I don't know. It's an open question for me. Maybe at some point, but at the moment, I'd like to finish the work that I started more than 2 decades ago, and then maybe I'll maybe reassess. So who knows?
Yeah, fair enough. I'm aware of time. I have 2 really quick questions for you. Firstly, what are some other organisations that inspire you and whose work you admire?
I think probably the organisation I'd most admire is MSF, Doctors Without Borders, Medicine Sans Frontiers. I just have such profound admiration for them. I just love the extraordinary work they do globally. That is, we believe in protecting health as a human right, and we will go anywhere and everywhere in the world to uphold that right without fear or favour. I just think they're just extraordinary. Locally, I'm on a board of an organisation called Children's Ground, which is a predominantly First Nations board, and it's Indigenous controlled and led. And they're this amazing organisation in the Northern Territory of Australia who have a 25-year vision for First Nations children. That is, they go, we are going to create from 0 to 25 a health, education, empowerment, community system that gives First Nations children the greatest possible life outcomes by drawing on First Nations knowledge systems, expertise, connection to country, and being able to actually create a system that is Indigenous controlled with Indigenous agency and knowledge at its heart. And they do the most special and incredible work in ending what is this shameful chapter in this country's history about the continued systemic oppression and denial of equality. I mean, we're a shameful country that just in the last year said no to a referendum to recognise the oldest continuing living culture on earth, which is here in Australia, of 60,000 years in our constitution. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I have deep admiration for that organisation because I think they're doing incredible work in providing Aboriginal children the same life opportunities and chances, the same life expectancy and possibilities as all other children have, as they should have.
Brilliant. We'll put links to MSF and Children's Ground in the show notes. A final question for you. If people were to donate money to the ASRC, what sorts of things would that money go towards?
If you were donating to the ASRC, your money would be going to food, medicines, emergency housing, legal advice and assistance. It would be going to covering the cost of campaign trips. It would be going to powering our training of the next generation of refugee leaders. It would be going towards national and international advocacy and campaigning that is about movement building. At the heart of it, it would be about investing in the coalface, about supporting an organisation that actually creates real impact, provides services that transform the life expectancy and outcomes for people, but also is helping change policy and laws at a national level. And it's driven by evidence and the experiences and voices of refugees.
Fantastic. Well, the idea with this podcast is that every month I want to feature a different not-for-profit organisation, and then I also run a Patreon where people can support the project. Half the money helps me to keep sharing stories, and the other half goes directly to organisations that are featured. So I'll be sending that over very shortly. A big thank you to everyone who supports the project, and an even bigger thank you to you, Con. I've been a really big fan of your work for many years now, and it was an honour to actually get the chance to chat with you. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for providing the platform and the opportunity, and thank you to all your listeners for tuning in to your podcast. Keep up the wonderful work. Thank you, Brody.
Thanks, Con. Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
That was Con Karapanagiotidis, founder and director of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. As always, I'd like to highlight 3 key points that Con made, and the first is this one.
So in a given day, you'll have people present at 10 a.m. when our doors open. There'll be 50 to 70 families that will come in seeking their weekly fruit and vegetables and groceries for the week, and they'll source that through our food bank. There'll be people turning up who are homeless, literally with their life possessions in their hands. Women fleeing male violence in their home in desperate need of a safe refuge. You'll have people turning up with no income to get basic medicines for the kids, something as simple as Ventolin for your asthma or insulin. And our nurses will be there to provide healthcare and access to free medicines. We'll have people turning up in need of lawyers to defend them. Some of our people are allowed to work and study. It's a completely arbitrary system. But those who are, we can help them find work, link them into courses, or employ them through our social enterprises. At the same time, we are, if I think about this week here in Melbourne, we, on the one hand, are busily helping people in offshore detention centres and advocating for them and on the phones with them, welcoming 50 newly arrived refugees from Palestine that have just arrived from Gaza. We are supporting close to 7,000 people in any given time, in any given year. So it really is a one-stop shop of healthcare, housing, food, medical assistance, legal support, employment, education. We also spend a significant amount of our time training up young refugees to be the next generation of refugee leaders. We also have a refugee resource hub in another part of Melbourne called Dandenong, where we kind of incubate and provide support for refugee-led organisations. And we also invest heavily in refugee-led organisations because we believe that in any sort of social justice movement, the people with lived experience need to be at the centre of the work that is being done.
The scope of the ASRC's work would be impressive in any context, but I find it particularly extraordinary given how the organisation started. I think back to when Con was talking about the early days, organising his students to paint a small shop front and filling it with furniture from his mum. And then you compare that to what it's turned into today. It really emphasises Con's message that I opened the episode with, the importance of just starting somewhere, rolling up your sleeves and having a crack. The next point I want to highlight is this.
And then they're walking around the camp with you, and they're showing you where different men had taken their lives and where different men had been killed, and about the areas that don't go anymore. And I remember meeting a man there who was so unwell. He was suffering from serious mental health issues and also from diabetes and just a whole range and all these things were untreated. They'd run out of medicine. This man was receiving none of the medicine that he would require. I remember thinking, God, this man is so unwell and so at risk, and we're trying to get this man off that island. Fast forward a few months later, and this man takes his life, and we call his wife to give our condolences because she's in another country hiding, hoping to be able to be reunited with him. Just calling to give our condolences, and we find out that the Australian government, even though they had died days earlier, hadn't actually called her to tell her that her husband had died in their care, and in fact they were hearing the news from us. That was quite something.
This is the brutal reality of Australia's asylum seeker policy. A man who fled to our country in search of a better life because we're a signatory to the Refugee Convention. He was locked up and indefinitely detained on a remote island more than 1,000 kilometres from Australia before being entirely abandoned, along with many others. And after being driven to suicide, our government didn't even bother to call his wife. I don't have the words to describe how utterly shameful this is, but it does link into this next point.
So I think what Australia's asylum seeker policy would look like if we're in charge of it. So Australia is just committed to taking 20,000 people in total each year, where it doesn't even put us in the top 60 based on the wealth. So if I was Prime Minister tomorrow, I'd start with some really basic things. One, we're going to start taking 50,000 people immediately as a starting point. Two, we're going to invest billions in our region to actually support the Asia-Pacific region that actually takes on so much more of the responsibility and support them to also be places where people can seek protection and asylum with dignity, safety, security, as well as working and being a shining example to encourage our entire region to sign up to the Refugee Convention. Three, we would start implementing sanctions and stop trading with the very countries that we are creating refugees from. We are so responsible for so many of the refugees, whether it's our wars in Afghanistan, our trade with Sri Lanka, all the things that we've done here, over the last couple of decades, and then wonder what is happening here. So I think we need to we are not going to be assisting in any arms trades. We're not going to be assisting creating a next generation of refugees, and we're going to use sanctions for countries that are refugee producing rather than be trading with them. Four, we're going to not allow this to be politicized. We're going to work for bipartisanship. This is a moral and humanitarian issue. It's not a political one. Five, we would commit to there being no mandatory indefinite detention of people. Six, we would let all people who come and seek asylum the right to work, healthcare, and a safety net while they get on their feet. Seven, we would, positively and continuously talk about the contribution that multiculturalism and migrants and refugees have. And eight, in every policy and practice and law, in every big picture vision of this country, instead of what's happening now where we're cutting immigration, we're apologising for immigration, we're scapegoating immigration for cost of living pressures, we would actually go embrace the fact that post-World War II, immigration has transformed this country, and that we would actually be investing in that. And we would also be looking at ways of going, how do we meet our humanitarian obligations and also be entrepreneurial and go, we can actually strengthen our economy and our community and our country while actually taking many more people too. You'd start with those basic things. And that's we sit there and we blame refugees, and yet the system that is failing us is the current system. And I'd scrap all these awful things. I'd end offshore detention. You would stop leaving people in limbo 12 years later still waiting for a visa. You would have a fair legal process. and people are able to access legal assistance. Like, at the heart of it, it's about you would lead a government that understands that refugees are the victims, not the villains here. And our job is to protect them, not to punish them for not dying. Yeah? And that you don't want anyone getting on a boat and coming by sea. And so you tackle that by providing safe passage, by actually creating an actual queue that enables people to safely be resettled here and throughout our region. Neither of those things exist right now. And then we blame refugees for being forced to take unsafe journeys, just like we do in North America and in Europe and throughout the world.
This is what a thoughtful, compassionate, human rights-centred approach to asylum seekers looks like. Con touches on every aspect of the issue here, from the fact that Australia is responsible for creating many of the world's refugees, to the importance of bipartisanship, to the opportunity Australia has to become a regional leader. But most importantly, it's about the framing of refugees and asylum seekers. Almost by definition, they are some of the most resilient, determined, hard-working people that you'll ever meet, and they should always be viewed as a benefit to society. If you'd like to support the amazing work of the ASRC, you can donate to them directly by visiting asrc.org.au, and you can follow their work on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. On behalf of all the amazing people who support this project, I was able to make a donation of $140 to the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. If you'd like to help me give more money to more amazing NGOs in the future, please consider signing up to the Patreon via the link in the show notes for as little as $5 a month. In the show notes, you'll also find further information about a range of topics that Con and I discussed during this conversation. Another big thank you to everyone who supports this podcast, and to Con Karapanagiotidis for being keen to chat with me about the incredible work of him and his team. I hope you found the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre as inspiring as I did, and I'll see you next month for another episode of Protect the World.